Hello everyone. In this video, I just wanted to cover a few of the different cluster types available, a few of the different use cases for each one, and yeah, a few other nuances. So to begin with, and I'm using the software ExoCharts here. I'm using the volume profile, probably one of the most bog standard ones, very plain and simple one, which will simply show you per cluster where the volume on a per cluster basis. Okay, and this is adjusted again per tick size. I won't dive too much into the basics of every single component of a footprint software, but this is just simply showing you where the most volume has occurred, or where volume has occurred within a given profile itself. Okay, this is very, very basic in my opinion. You only see where the volume's coming in. You have no idea about really the delta unless you combine it with a different text type. But I'm going to come back and circle back to a few of them, and we'll come on to some more interesting ones in my opinion sooner or later. Then we have delta profile, which again is very similar to the volume profile. At least in ExoCharts, you can have the settings where the delta profile is based on volume as well. So you get the volume and then just a delta shading on top of that. Basically, you can see the actual cluster width and size doesn't change at all. It literally is just adding colors, okay, to that. And I'll go through the settings of that later. So yeah, this is delta profile again. What it's simply showing you, if we change this to bid ask, etc., you can see the delta. Okay, so positive, and it's shading it based on that. So where's buying going on, where's selling going on, and it's really important to understand that again when you're looking at footprint charts, etc., you're looking at the aggressor. So you're looking at market orders coming in. Again, they have to be filled by the opposing side limit sell order, but this is what this is showing, and you're really able to identify, okay, where are clusters of buying going on, especially within thin areas of imbalance, for example. So if you're looking here, you have this really thick move up to the upside, or like a thin move almost, with the imbalance coming in as soon as you breach this high. Okay, and then you have this area here where you have this high, relatively high in relation to the candle, where there's more buying going on, and it could offer a level of interest in that case there. So just a basic overview of delta profiles there, nothing too crazy. Then you go on to clusters, which is showing you the same thing as the volume profiles, just in a cluster basis, where the dark shading is representing high volume, the light shading representing low volume areas. Again, nothing too fancy about this. There's nothing too but I'm going to show you later on actually how you can adjust, and actually, in my opinion, the volume profile, you can actually change this to actually make it a lot better. If you're tinkering, but I'm going to still cover these all one by one. So you have volume cluster here, again, dark shading, high volume, and really important to understand when you're looking at these clusters here. If we just change the text type to volume, how is it shading the cluster itself? Because this is also important. If you go to chart settings, cluster, you can change it here based on the amount of candles back. So it's looking back 50 candles and then comparing it against that. How does the clustering compare in relation to that? You've got 20 tints there, tint steps. So what I would do, you can stick this on if you wanted to, fixed volume, and then, we could set it to 50 million. And you can see that the clustering now is fixed and shading based on that 50 million. And, it changes it all. So if you want adaptive, and you can, increase this, look back if you want, or you can decrease it to like 2, do as you wish. I think 50 or 75 is a sweet spot, to be honest. That's why we left it on that as the default. And you can change it in relation to the volume cluster tint steps. So, if you set it to 2, you're only going to get 2 colors. Okay, and it's going to be based on, the adaptive. So, you really want to have this about 20 at least. Okay. In that case, so that's the volume cluster. Delta cluster, again, same thing, and you can see again, just really important notice here, how from volume to delta, the shading really hasn't changed. And that's because if you go into delta cluster settings, the calculation mode is volume based. So you're getting actual shading based on volume, but the coloring is not just one static color. It's based on that specific cluster's delta. So if that sounded confusing, that definitely was the best way to explain it though. If I change to delta based, you'll then see how the shading shifts to where there's more aggressive delta. You have a darker shading compared to volume. But this is a really good way, of looking at delta clusters. In my opinion, the way this has now been configured, I don't want to say it makes the volume cluster obsolete, but this gives you the same, if not a better insight. You still see where the high volume is, but you also know which sided that volume is without losing any sort of granularity in relation to anything else. So that is delta cluster. Then you have bid ask profile. Okay, very basic. Sells on the left, buys on the right, market buys on the right, market sells on the left again. There's no shading to this. It's simply looking at the candle and going through that there. Again, you can adjust the bar width at activity again based on the amount of candles back. So it's looking back on the amount of candles back and then going, okay, based on the last 50 candles, I'm going to adjust this current candles, each individual cluster's width. So you can see how far it extends based on those last 50 candles back. So you can adjust it to 10 and it might adjust, or maybe more, and some of these will adjust, right? And you can change this and this will adjust it as well. So yeah, you can really go through and tinker that. But I don't personally use this one too much. Fairly basic bid ask cluster type. Delta ladder cluster, again, these are all different representations of a very similar thing. Very similar to the actual delta cluster. It's simply just a ladder, almost where there's positive delta on the right and there'll be negative delta on the left. I won't dive into these ones too much. Similar with this, it's like a combination of all of them. You're getting the delta ladder profile, so you're seeing how far it extends and on which side, and the kind of the volume shading as well. Those were the basic ones. We're going to move on to the OI based ones in a second because those are also really interesting. But it's also really important to note that when you're doing any of these, okay, let's say the volume profile, we'll turn the value area off. You can actually decide in terms of the text type, which text type you want to go with it. So for example, if you're looking at the volume profile, you don't necessarily have to match it with directly the volume, volume text type. Okay. You can have a delta or a bid ask or an imbalance. Okay. You can have whichever you like and that's really important because you could have like kind of two-dimensional, info coming in on a per cluster basis. So you can have a volume profile. And then when you have, for example, the imbalance, you can still see which side that is on. Okay. And I'll come back to this in a minute. So just keep that in mind also. And there's a setting here to sync text with cluster type. So if you do switch delta profile, it automatically switches the text type to delta. Moving on to open interest based total OI. Okay. What is the open interest? Well, I don't really use this one. I want to be honest. I'm just going to skip this one. I really don't use this. OI created. Okay, so what's the OI created at each individual level? Okay, this is excluding remove delta. We know just simply what is the total OI created at each individual level. OI removed, OI created versus removed at each individual level. Okay, and by the way, this is on Hyperliquid. I should probably change this over to Bybit, BTC USDT, so you can get a clearer picture of everything. And we're back. So OI based. Then you have new shorts. And these are, by the way, when you're looking at open interest, really important to understand this as well. When you're looking at, for example, XO charts, all of these coming in here. Whoops, I can't do that. All these coming in OI total created, removed versus created are 100% accurate. The ones below are based on estimations, although they're very, very good estimations from my testings as well and understanding the core logic behind it. These are still just, I thought I'd really point that out to you, okay? So when you're looking at new shorts versus longs, here, new longs, this is an estimate, but it's still very accurate in my opinion. So when you're looking at this, and what does it mean when you see zeros at the top? Okay. Well, in relation to the text type, it means that, these are likely stops being hit when you're looking at new positions. So this cluster type here, going back to this, new shorts sell versus new longs buy, are specifically relating to open interest creating and where you're looking for trap traders. When you're looking at something like the Delta cluster, you have to infer where new positions are opening based on the open interest at the bottom, or net longs, net shorts at the bottom, for example. But having the cluster type, specifically new shorts versus new longs buy, you're specifically looking at new positioning here, okay, and where that's ongoing. And you can see here, and it makes a lot of sense because when you're seeing these, for example, these flushes up, you're seeing zeros occurring. You're thinking, why there's zeros occurring? That's because people are getting stopped out. No new positions are really opening there. At least on Bybit alone, you can have aggregated versions of this, by the way, as well, if you want. But you're seeing, price breached this high, maybe a few positions opening, but then you're seeing a ton of stops being hit and flooded through. So you can keep that in mind as well. If you want to be looking for new positions, I really like this one. If you have a need for, new shorts versus shorts exit. So again, this cluster type is showing you new shorts on the left. So shorts, opening, for example, and on the right is showing you where shorts are closing. Okay. Because if you exit a short, you're buying, and that's also being showed here. So you can have that option as well. If you're trying to identify one side of the market, personally, I don't use this one. Long exit, sell versus short exit, buy. Okay. And then you have long exit, sell I really wouldn't use this one. I don't, without cutting too much time up, taking up too much of your time, I really would just use this one, or I'd use this one down here, which is like a combination of everything. You can see it's taking individual profile and then it's looking at it and going, look, new longs opening here, and then also you've got shorts closing, which make up this portion of this cluster. New shorts, positions closing as well. So you can see that on a per cluster basis as well, 4-dimension of what each individual quadrant is doing. The final thing I wanted to mention here, like I said, I was going to come back to, was when you're looking at volume profile. Let's say we've got the volume profile. Each cluster has this exact option, by the way, so really important to note. If we go to settings, cluster, and then we go to cluster filter. For example, when you're looking at the volume cluster, we can filter and change this around. So if we just change this to something like gray, okay, and we're going to change it to delta. So we've got volume cluster on here, and let's change the delta to, let's say 40 million. We'll change something like this. But essentially what you're looking at, because I forgot this, I need to put this on delta. Let's change it to 20 million. 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what you're seeing here is we've got volume profile, but now we're only highlighting specific areas of high delta, sorry. So we've got volume profile and then high delta being clustered on top. And again, we're looking at delta here. So these are large areas of where aggressive deltas occurred, and one-sided movement through the buyer side on this case, one-sided seller movement on this case here as well. And you can add that on top. So, when you're looking at highs or lows, where's aggressive delta being coming in from? And you can really play with this as you like, because it adds a lot more dimension to everything. If I'm looking at, something like a delta cluster, I can filter it to only show where high deltas occurred or where high volumes occurred at a certain threshold as well. I won't dive into that too much, but it's really important that you can add that on every single thing. Another thing to add, and this isn't really part of the cluster types thing at all, if I'm honest, but if we go to chart settings, aggregated data, when I'm looking at footprint clusters, I can add in a pair. I can add in, go to Hyperliquid, type in BTC. We can add in Hyperliquid here, and we can enable all of this. I mean, I've done videos on aggregated data already, but just so you're aware, when I'm looking at delta cluster information, I'm aggregating it with, 3 exchanges primarily right now, which are Hyperliquid, Bybit, and Binance. So if I go back here, I can add a pair of Binance, BTC, Binance USDT here, and we can enable all of this. And now we're getting a cluster view of all 3 exchanges in one, including rec liquidations, volume, open interest, etc., etc. And again, you can filter that to you can see all these filters are lighting up more because we've got a lot more volume coming in. So it makes sense to then adjust the cluster type based on that, to, let's say 30, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we can change this back, I would say, to volume. And you can see where the high volume is, the high delta areas are really coming into play here. So, yeah, hopefully I've covered every single cluster type for you all. A few of the nuances around it. I mean, you can see here how you have these high areas of delta occurring. Price comes back down into it, bounces from it, and continues higher and higher. So you can see and use all of these for multitudes of different use cases. But I thought I'd just point out a few of the key settings for you all to mess around with. Hopefully you'll find that valuable, and I'll catch you all later.